and Linda van Tilburg for Biznews. Roelf Meyer is known as one of the duo who managed to get negotiations between the former National Party and the ANC for South Africa's constitution over the line. The other part of that duo was President Cyril Ramaphosa. Since then, he has spent his years advising strife-torn areas in the world on conflict resolution. And I'm so happy that he's joining me in the studio now. Hi Roelf. Lovely to see you.
Good to see you, Linda. Thanks for the opportunity and thanks for the interview.
Well, we would love to do. What are you up to now? What are you doing?
Well, I keep on saying I'm trying my best to retire, but I'm not succeeding. I'm at the age where I think I'm in a position where I can actually sit back and take it more in a more relaxed way. But there are opportunities around the world as well as in South Africa where one has been called upon to try and advise, to give ideas, to give guidance and so forth. And that is mainly what I keep myself busy with, So if I look back at the last few years since COVID, things have started to pick up again. Of course, COVID brought everything in the space that I was active prior to that to a standstill. And then it took some time to get the activities going again. For some time, I didn't travel at all to the rest of the world or to other countries. Now it's almost every month in a different place, and it's wonderful to have these opportunities. And what I can say is I still learn a lot. I learn every day from what is happening around the world, but also, in our own situation, it is not as if I spent all my time outside of the country. We started after President Ramaphosa became, his administration took over in 2018. We started to assist in bringing private sector and government closer to each other on a sectoral basis. So that is keeping me busy as well. And, in some ways good effects and other ways not so good. But, the point is there's a lot to do.
Oh, let's start with the business one. I saw that there was a meeting just a couple of days ago about that. Is business kind of forthrightly telling the president, you need to do something about load shedding, you need to do something about water, the delivery that you've been talking for a long time has not happened?
Yeah, that meeting was arranged, I think, from both sides, by the president as well as the captains of industry. I was not present for that reason because I'm not a captain of industry. But I think we can say that over the last 3 years or 4 years, we've been active in trying to get government and private sector to understand each other better, first of all. And through our experience, myself and others that launched this initiative, we have fairly good access to both sides, to government on the one side and private sector, some private sector industries on the other side. And in that process, we help to get communication going. And that is happening now. And I think what is good about last week's meeting and the outcome of that and commitments made from both sides is that private sector or business or the captains of industry want to help government, in particular in the three areas that provide huge challenges at the moment, which is electricity or energy on the one side, logistics on the other side, and then, of course, to my mind, the main one, that is the situation regarding crime in the country. And those three areas, I think, are all very relevant to business. When we started this initiative way back in 2018, it was actually initiated by Johan van Zyl, who was then the CEO of Toyota in Europe. And we were good friends. Unfortunately, we lost him due to COVID. But his whole idea was try to do what the Japanese did so well over the years, and that is get business and private sector to work together towards the common aims and the best result for the country.
So by that, I assume you still have a good relationship with President Ramaphosa?
I have at the personal level a good relationship with him, but he's at a completely different. Now, let me put it the other way around. I'm in a different position from where he finds himself. He has to deal with the problems on an ongoing basis every day. I can sit back and have an overall look at things, and can try to give ideas and make inputs where it's necessary. But it's he has the main task of finding the answers and taking responsibility for that. It's easy to criticize from the outside, like many people do, but sitting there and finding the right answers and and execute the solutions is often the problem, and I feel for him when it comes to the execution side, because he hasn't got always the state ability or the state's ability, the administrative capability to execute the solutions, and that remains a challenge for South Africa.
Well, everybody thought after the ANC conference last year that he has a mandate now, but he's still keeping a lot of people in his cabinet. So do you think it's still the internal things that's happening in the in the ANC that's preventing him from jumping into action?
Well, he certainly has the mandate, but I think, and as an outsider, if I look at it, I think there's a particular problem that he has to deal with in this regard, and that is that the people he appoints in cabinet have to come from members of parliament. So whatever replacements he intends to make, he has to find the right replacements within the context of the members of parliament. That is what the Constitution requires, and there might be limited options in that regard. Or restrictions as far as who he has available for which particular responsibility. We can criticize very heavily the execution of government functions with regard to certain portfolios, but then you have to find a replacement for that, and you can't just select somebody from the outside. It has to be a person who's in parliament already, and that is part of the problem, I think. That, I think, explains to a large extent why the president has, if I can put it this way, loaded his office, the presidency, very specifically in recent times. Also, he gets criticized for that. But I think that explains why he's doing it. He wants to get capability as strongly as possible where he can manage it. And that is obviously within the presidency. He now sits with 4 or 5 ministers and a big contingent of officials in his office. And I think it's all within his drive to make sure that things get done.
Yeah, possibly more is going to get done before the ANC runs into the 2024 coalition. What did you follow the debates on the coalitions? Is there sort of a hope that the opposition parties can get their act together and that the ANC will actually go under 50%? What, as a politician who's followed the scene and the terrain for so long, is there any predictions you can make?
I think it's too early to make predictions, Linda. It's still a year away for the next election. And there's a lot of polls that indicate this and indicate that there's dissatisfaction with the ANC and so on. But when it comes closer to the election time, we might see a different picture. And I think we must not overestimate the chances for the ANC not to get 50%. I'm not saying they're going to get 50%, but I think it would be important to be realistic about the possibilities. There was a very good article yesterday, I think, by Stephen Grootes, who suggested that maybe the ANC will have to rely on a few smaller parties to get that majority if it doesn't get an outright majority, and that could bring about coalitions of a kind. But South Africa hasn't got good experience of coalitions so far. That is part of the reality. In essence, I think we must remember there are actually only 2 parties that are capable of governing in terms of their experience. The one is the ANC, and of course the other one is the DA, particularly through the Western Cape, where they're doing a pretty good job. But all the other parties that might be in line for coalitions have no real experience, and those that had the experience at the metro level haven't proved themselves. So I would not go too early and too quickly in speculation about coalitions, because I don't think that is necessarily the answer.
Yeah, and as both me and you who followed elections so long, there's a lot of horse trading that would go on, not now, but the real horse trading is the night after the elections, or when the election results is actually out.
Yeah, it's impossible to make deals beforehand, unless you have a situation where, parties go into coalition beforehand to make an impact on the voter choices. But I don't think that is going to happen in South Africa's case yet. Many people would say, the opportunity for real change is not necessarily there for next year's election, but rather the following one, which is 2029. But I think all of this is speculation right now.
Well, you are known as a peacemaker, so is Mr. Ramaphosa, and you've got particularly a long history of this. And what do you make of this plans of South Africa? We talked about this before, but this is sort of more real now after South Africa has been accused that it's not really non-aligned in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. What is the chances of anything coming from President Ramaphosa's efforts to try to get a peace mission with other African countries together?
Yeah, my understanding is that this initiative in the beginning was launched actually by the Brazzaville Foundation, and I think that is where it originated. So South Africa's sort of linked onto that at the later stage, and I think the CEO of that foundation was actually probably the key person in getting this moving forward. Very difficult to say what the chances are, Linda. I observe the conflict there from a far distance and with limited insights. But two things come to my mind. The one is there is this age-old confrontation between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And it's not only since the end of the Cold War, it was probably long before. I've spoken to people who served in the defense force of the Soviet Union, who told me that the Ukrainians and the Russians never saw eye to eye, even under those circumstances. So it's coming a long way. That is the one side. The other one is the geopolitical context. The rest of Europe, of course, are looking at Ukraine for a very specific purpose, and so does the United States. And anybody from the outside who would enter the scene of the conflict have to keep in mind what the expectations would be from Europe, and I refer to Western Europe, of course, and the United States. It's impossible that they would allow a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine to happen without their consent and approval. And I think that is just the natural situation, and that is why it's a very complicated conflict, so to speak. And I think any hope from the outside or any effort from the outside will have to keep these two factors in mind. Of course, there are other factors as well, but it's a complicated situation.
If you look at what happened when you were in cabinet and everything, what do you make of what seems to be these overtures of the Ramaphosa government towards Russia? Some people are saying that there's a lot of money coming from Russia into the ANC, possibly from Victor Vekselberg, which is close to Putin. If you look at what's happening there, are they totally missing the boat, thinking that they can be that close to Russia and play this game with the West as well? Because it seems to be unraveling, and that some agreements with America, like AGOA, might be in danger.
Yeah, it's difficult, I think, to understand exactly the considerations that the ANC has on the one side, there's obviously the historic thing, the support that you received from the Soviet Union, and it's common knowledge that Putin still sees himself probably in that frame of mind, coming from that era. But there's also another consideration, I think, and that is that we are part of the global South as South Africa, and so is so is the rest of the continent of Africa, and I think there's some element of that also comes forward within this context, and that's part of the argument that I think President Ramaphosa has often brought forward and said, we are non-aligned in the bigger picture, and we want to promote the interest of the global South primarily. Whether it's done in the correct way and whether it's keeping in mind the economic interests of South Africa in the right way is doubtful. And we've seen it now that once the American Congress leaders from both sides made an appeal to the White House, suddenly Ebram Patel is on a flight to Washington. They were to go and advocate for the retention of AGOA favorites for South Africa. So, I think there was some overstepping, if I can put it that way, in terms of the way in which it came across, the South African position, overstepping on both sides. We've seen what the ambassador said, the US ambassador, but we've also seen what some commentators from the ANC side said about the US. So there was some overstepping on both sides. And I think, the question is, how can we ensure that we keep normal relations in such a way that South Africa is not at the receiving end of the wrong decisions in Washington. So the indications are, I think, that some of the initial pronouncements as far as South Africa's position vis-a-vis Moscow is concerned have been calmed down, and I think this initiative where South Africa seemingly wants to take a prominent position of a peace mission is aimed at balancing it out with regard to the initial, let's say, taking sides picture that came across. But how it's going to work out, we will have to see.
And whether Putin will actually arrive.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we go back to the deal that was made between the ANC and the National Party in the 1990s and eventually led to the election in 1994? There's a lot of criticism lately. People tend to criticize it and say the deal was wrong, and they even criticize Nelson Mandela. And if you look at some of the changes that now need to be made in the Electoral Act, if you look back, do you still think that it was the right deal for the right time?
I think that there are 2 points that have to be taken into account before we take it any further, any discussion of this kind. The one is that we had to bring the conflict to an end in South Africa. The conflict that came about as a result of apartheid and the resistance against apartheid, the liberation struggle that existed. And we had to find a way to bring that to a peaceful end. And that is what we succeeded in doing. And that essentially was done through the negotiations that you observed in the period up to 1994, which led to the adoption of the interim constitution and the transition to democracy that took place in 1994. So that was the one side of it. If you want to call that a deal, it was about the end, bringing the conflict to an end and to introduce democracy for South Africa for the first time. That's the one side. The second side was the drafting of the final constitution, which happened after 1994. And that process was a clinical process. It was not about deals and what. It was really drafting and ensuring that we have the best constitution for the country. I can quite frankly say the influence of President Mandela, even President de Klerk, or Deputy President de Klerk as he was at that stage, were limited because the constitution makers were the elected members of parliament who acted as the constitutional assembly. And the drafting of the constitution, the final constitution, took place through the constitutional assembly, the structures that were created for that purpose, and the technical experts that were brought in to ensure that we drafted the constitution that was the best for South Africa. And I still think it is the best constitution in the world, by the way. But it was not, that whole process, from 94 onwards, was not about political deals. It was really about coming to agreement on the content of the best constitution for the needs of South Africa. Now, why am I saying it's the best constitution in the world? If you look at Chapter 2, the Bill of Rights, it provides for everything that is necessary to ensure that every individual in this country has the right to be served by its government. That is what the Constitution says. So the shortcomings that people are experiencing as a result of that now and over the last 30 years has nothing to do with the content of the Constitution. It's the execution that failed South Africa. And again, two things matter in that regard. Maybe after we finish the Constitution, we should have provided an implementation plan for that Constitution to ensure the socio-economic transformation, which we didn't do, because everybody that was part of the Constitution making sort of walked away from the site, and before the building was completed, the Constitution was in place, and it was left to the newly elected democratic government to look after the implementation. And I think that is the second failure. What I'm saying is maybe we should have had a structure in place to plan for the implementation of the Constitution like we planned for the putting together of the Constitution in the first instance. But we didn't do that. And then the government itself, over the years, in various respects, I think failed with regard to the implementation. And we all know the big failures that particularly happened during the Zuma period, as far as that is. So now South Africans at large are suffering because of the lack of implementation.
What do you say about, sometimes from the business sector, people who say that the black empowerment deals and what was, I'm calling this a deal because that was more, they were more deals that were made, was actually the beginning of state capture, and that was a huge mistake. And you even get criticism not only from businessmen that you might think are on a certain side of the spectrum. It's sort of generally said that that has been handled wrong, and that wealth has not been distributed to the lower levels of society, that is kept in the hands of a couple of people who got extremely rich.
Yeah, I think black economic empowerment, unfortunately, over the years, at different stages of its own design, and I don't think we still don't have the right design in place for that. It came about, through the empowerment opportunities that individuals benefited from, like you say. And today we have an elite on the black side that in some cases have really, really benefited hugely, but without proper distribution to anyone else. And that result we can see everywhere. So that is on the one point. But the other one is, of course, state capture was primarily aimed at looting the state-owned enterprises. From Eskom through Transnet and the rest. the one area that I know pretty well is the one of Denel. And the looting that took place there is just unbelievable. But that was the state capture, agenda and focus. In other words, state-owned enterprises primarily. How do we correct black economic empowerment in terms of its application? I don't think there's any doubt there has to be black economic empowerment. But many people would say empowerment didn't take place because the average individual didn't benefit from that, didn't see the results. And the late Johan van Zyl, that I referred to earlier, always said, there can be a different model, and he actually advocated this with the president and with Ibrahim Patel and others, to say there is a different model that business will buy into, but we need a plan to make that happen, where the shift is from equity-based empowerment to actual sharing in the benefits that private sector produce by the workforce. And in that way, we can actually multiply the benefits of empowerment, not only to the individuals that are part of the workforce, but also to individuals that are in the economic activity on a very broad basis. And I've seen, research that have been done with regard to that can actually change around in a very short space of time the actual results of economic empowerment, of black economic empowerment. But then, in order to make that happen, the model has to be changed. But of course, either you and I can't decide there has to be a new model. It will have to be negotiated. And that all interested parties have to come to the table and sit together and say, okay, let's find a different way of making it more effective so that South Africans at large can benefit.
You know the nitty-gritty of the rules that govern elections in our country. And the IFEC has said this before, that elections in South Africa would be free and fair. We have the right checks and balances in place. Are you confident that the 1994, you see, I'm still stuck there, the 2024 elections in South Africa will be free and fair, and there won't be, if the ANC does lose power, there won't be efforts to try to do something to make sure that election is not free and fair?
Well, I think, first of all, I have confidence in the IEC. I don't see any reason why there should be doubts about it. And from what I know from the outside, I think they are as trusted as they have been in the past as an institution that's been provided for in the Constitution, put it that way. It's a constitutional institution. And I don't think there's any reason to doubt their capability and their independence. What is at stake at the moment in terms of the current debate is, of course, the challenges before the Constitutional Court with regard to changing the electoral system. And unfortunately, that is late in the day to have this kind of debate at present. Late in the day in terms of the preparations, because it is less than a year away. And I would just hope there's clarity soon enough by the Constitutional Court so that that it would not result into challenges of the election outcome when the election itself comes. So, that is an issue. And again, here, I think this matter should have been attended to much, much earlier. The Constitutional Court made a ruling about this, if I remember correctly, in 2020 already. And Parliament was supposed to bring about the necessary amendments to the electoral law already by June or July last year, which was only affected very recently, but in such a way that it's not getting certainty, and that is why there are new challenges before the Constitutional Court in this regard. So my worry is more about the time span that we're dealing with here. And let me go back just one comment. The initial process or electoral process in South Africa, the type of election that was established, namely the free or complete proportional system that was provided for in the first election, the whole idea was that had to be reviewed after 5 years. And that review was never done, or it was never attended to. There was a task team that investigated the situation, that brought about a review report. I think it was around about 2003. And that report was never considered. And so we're still sitting on something that is not finished business as far as the electoral system is concerned. And now we have this unnecessary contestation about, independent candidates, etc., etc.
And you mentioned the issue of questioning the election results, or, accepting the election results. You would never have thought America would have had a problem with that after Donald Trump didn't accept the election result and actually led to the storming of Congress. Are you worried about if something different, a different result than what the ANC might have, that might happen, that they might not accept the election results?
I don't see it yet. I don't see any reason why there should be such a challenge in South Africa. From what I know and have experienced in every respect, I think we have a solid system in South Africa, and there should not be an expectation of that kind. So I'm confident that we will not end up in a situation like that. I don't think we have a Trump-like person in South Africa right now that would come forward with such an attempt. Maybe him and Zuma were on the same, in the same space as far as that is. If you look at the ongoing challenges that Zuma even produced to the Constitutional Court and to the courts at large, various parts of the court system. But I don't see anybody else that out of the same inclination.
Just lastly, you've mentioned that you've been involved in a couple of conflicts resolution, and it's picked up again after 2019, after the pandemic. This is not Russia and Ukraine. Where are you involved?
There are individual cases where we are, trying to assist by giving advice and so forth. The one is from Myanmar, which is an ongoing, very sad situation. And there's no solution to that, simply because there's no respect for the rule of law inside the country. There's a military junta that's in charge now for the last 2 years, and more than 2 years, and there's no real pressure from the outside to bring about change. There's very little outside support for the democratic resistance inside the country. So we are involved in trying to help. In the Middle East, it's on the agenda on an ongoing basis. We are working with a number of other organizations in that regard, including also our own government. And let me just describe, I'm part of a small entity called Transformation Initiative. And our main task is to share the South African experience during our transition with others in conflict. And that is what we have been doing on an ongoing basis. We're working in a number of African countries, which include Zimbabwe, Central African Republic, the Sudans, and a number of others, with the aim of sharing our experience, but also trying to promote multi-party democracy in these cases in a workable way. And then in the past, we've been working in Colombia, which is not out of sight in terms of of the ongoing contestations there. So, there's plenty of opportunity to do some work. And more recently, I should not say it too loudly, but it is a fact that we have been asked, our institution, in Transformation Initiative, have been asked to come and share South African experience with regard to the factionalism that prevail in the United States.
Wow.
I was there together with one of my colleagues, Mohammed Baba, in January this year for 2 weeks, sharing our experience on a road trip through various communities in upstate New York and in Ohio. And now we've been asked to go back, and we will go there for 2 weeks in July to do exactly the same in the more southern part of the United States, Atlanta, Tennessee, Kentucky, and so forth. And it's like town hall meetings where we've been asked to speak to the people to say, this is how we reconciled as opposing sides in the South African conflict. It's amazing to know that, in the United States, there is this level of contestation as a result of the factionalism that emerged. And it's on the one side, the result of the factionalism between the Democrats and the Republicans. But of course, then also, and that is more worrying, the factionalism as a result of white-black divisions in the United States. You will find people who are expressing their concern about white nationalism as an emerging fear in the United States, and particularly in some parts of the United States. I would never have thought that this is something that would come to this level in the United States. So we've been asked. We didn't present ourselves, but we've been asked to come over and share these experiences, and it seems it's not going to stop.
It seems you are trying to get reconciliation with your experience. It's so interesting speaking to you. Thanks so much, Roelf Meyer.
Thank you, Linda.